I wonder if you wonder if I feel weird. Well, I don't. I am so happy to be here. I mean, I used to be a pastor here. It just feels so good to be with my ladies. I've been meeting with you on and off for 36 years, so that's before some of you were born. I remember those meetings. I wrote books about them. And I want to just say out loud that the privilege really is moving to me because I just think one of the biggest issues in our world is what it means to be male and female. And you have been such a intelligent, articulate, mature, Bible-saturated kind of gathering every time we've met that I have found an echo so that I've been taught, I've been refined, I've been helped and encouraged, and I don't think I could have written the things I wrote or preached the things I preached. I was just with the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood last week. All day long, everybody talked about these issues of manhood and womanhood, and they asked me to close the day, and there I'm doing it again, and I'm going to use some of what I said there here. But all that just to say, I don't feel out of place here. I think this is what pastors should do, and so I hope it's okay that I still feel that way about you. And, well, here's another little reason why. We can argue about the appropriate roles of ways to exercise authority in the church, right? And the eldership and teaching and various things. We can argue about that, but here's what I think there really is no argument about. You are, and I'm thinking now, I know a lot of you are single, but I'm thinking now of moms. I don't know, maybe half of you, three-quarters, I don't know how many of you are moms. But anyway, I believe that moms are the most influential people in the world. Therefore, if my life is devoted to spreading a passion for the supremacy of God in all things, for the joy of all peoples through Jesus Christ, the ripple effect of touching moms in the world is incalculable. Vastly, vastly more influential than men in high office. Presidents are not nearly as influential as moms. Good grief. So, if you just use the word influence rather than authority, your stock goes way up. So here I am speaking to those of you, single or married, who live lives in such a way that draws enormously important attention to God. I'd love to tackle that one from 1 Peter 3:5, but that's not my issue this time. We're talking about future grace, and I'm going to pray now and ask for help as we tackle this. Father, what a privilege here to stand before some who've been here from the beginning with me. Thinking of Cindy and others. And some, like Shar, I wish were here. I miss Shar. First one she won't be at in all my 36 years of interacting. And so our hearts are full of thankfulness, full of longing, full of good memories, high hopes. And I ask for help right now to be useful. These women bring 10,000 differing needs into this room. And you meet every one for your daughters. You do. You have a grace designed for every single need. So help me to be a channel of that grace now, I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So the theme is future grace for this conference. And my job is to, as I understand it, kind of give the big picture, and then Samantha steps in with saving grace, preaching about it, teaching about it, whatever she calls it, and Linda then with sustaining grace. So that's kind of the big picture as I see it. So let me start with an experience that will set the trajectory of where I'm going to go. So I'm going to put a real specific point on it so it doesn't hang in the air with vagueness but gets real concrete. I just completed, day before yesterday, an article for Desiring God, the title of which is Cremation, a Modest Proposal. Now, I don't like cremation. I think the Bible points towards burial, not burning. However, I know people who are solid Christians who don't see it that way. Probably a lot in this church. And therefore, conflict is possible, likely. So I gave the article to Noelle to read yesterday. She read it. I said, feedback before I send it off to DG. And she only flagged, graciously, one sentence about where I had said something about those who disagree and how we can hang together. I'm going to read you my revised 2 sentences, which you might think still need work. I want to give biblical pointers for why burial is preferable to cremation. I say preferable, not commanded, in the hope that a culture created by a church in favor of burying would not condemn or ostracize a person who chose differently. And I encourage those who choose cremation not to equate my disapproval with ostracism. Otherwise, real disagreements aren't possible among friends. End of quote. So, thinking about people who love each other, brothers and sisters in Christ, having differing views on something like that is kind of on my front burner right now, which is affecting what I'm going to say to you and how I'm going to deal with future grace. Here's my question for us. How does future grace help you day in and day out, hour by hour, not just survive relational conflicts, but remain a fountain of overflowing, life-giving blessing in relationships of conflict? That's the question I'm asking. Now, before we can ask how it works, how does future grace help you be a fountain? The Bible says the lips of the righteous are a fountain of life. That's what I think moms, wives, single women should be. You should pray, God, make my mouth a fountain of blessing, a fountain of life, especially in moments of conflict. With kids, spouse, work, church. Make my mouth a fountain of life. Before we can work it out, which I hope to do before we're done, how that works, we need to talk about the meaning of the terms that I love. Future grace, past grace, and so on. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to define for you, so you know what I mean. Because that phrase, future grace, not in the Bible. Grace is all over the place, but future grace is my little phrase. What do I mean by it? How is it different from past grace? How do they relate to each other? And in the process, distinguish grace as pardon and grace as power. Okay, so that's where we're going. When I say future grace, I have in mind the powerful, practical, undeserved help of God in every way that you need help, starting now to eternity. That's future grace. The powerful, practical, undeserved helpfulness of God in every way that you need help from now forever. That's future grace as I mean it. Now, a couple of things I hope are clear in that sentence. The first is, when you hear me say the word future, don't just think, oh, he means like the second coming. He means like heaven. I do. But I mean 5 seconds from now, will I be able to finish this sermon? Will I have a stroke and my eyes roll over and I fall over? That could totally happen. I'm 70 years old, for goodness sakes. So now how should I think? How should I feel about the next 5 minutes? That's future grace. And frankly, having faith for the next 5 hours is way a bigger challenge than the next 500 years. So just know, when I say future, I mean starting now, forever. Got that? Future does not mean way, way, way out there. It means 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, 5 decades, 5,000 ages of millennia. You will still need grace. We will live on grace forever, starting now. So that's the first clarification, the difference between future and past. Get to past in a minute. Second clarification, I mean mainly when I say future grace, grace as power mainly, not grace as pardon mainly. I know they're inseparable because I'm a sinner. And if God is going to come to me and not incinerate me, but help me, He's got to pardon my sin first. Otherwise, I'm just deserve judgment. That's all I'm going to get is judgment. So before He's powerful for me, He's got to pardon me. So I know they're inseparable, but I have the feeling that a lot of us, and I don't know where you are on this, when we think grace, we almost immediately think forgiveness. And He treats me better than I deserve, instead of thinking mighty power to solve my problems, mighty power to meet my needs of every kind. We may not think of grace that way. I want you to think of grace that way, not just the pardon way. Let me give you 2 verses for the futureness of grace and the power of grace. So here are the 2 verses. 2 Corinthians 9:8. God is able to make all grace abound to you. So when He says that, that's clearly future, right? It isn't there yet. God is able to make it abound to you. So that's future. God is able to make all grace abound to you so that, having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. So what is that verse? That verse says, I'm praying and you're believing that God is going to come to you, make grace abound to you, and the effect of that grace abounding to you is power for work, power to do the good things God calls you to do. That's the power I mean. Every single day, we have good works appointed for us, all of you. You'll not do one of them without grace, powerful grace. We will sink into selfishness and live for ourselves and never trust God to do anything powerful if we don't have this kind of grace as power, grace as future. Here's another verse. 1 Corinthians 15:10. I love this. Boy, people ask me endless questions about theology. This verse comes up almost as many times as any other verse. By the grace of God, I am what I am. Wouldn't that be great for all of you just to say that and be just okay with that, right? By the grace of God, I am what I am. Tall, short, thick, thin, gray, bald, you're not, whatever. Just, I'm okay because grace is holding me. So that's first. I love this verse. By the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. People always wonder, you've got a sovereign God. Is there anything for you to do? I said, I do everything. Preaching, waving my arms. Nevertheless, it is not I, but the grace of God that is with me. He does all as the creator enabler. I do all as the actor. So grace, in Paul's mind, is the power to do everything. You see somebody working hard by faith. There's somebody living by faith in future grace. So I know those of you who are discerning and have been Christians for 30 years are probably saying to yourself, I think he's just talking about standing on the promises I cannot fail. And you're right. Like, oh, this is not new. My preacher 40 years ago said, stand on the promises and live by faith in the promises of God. And I said, if that communicates better than this, go for it. Because that is what I'm saying. The way to see future grace in the Bible is read the promises of the Bible. Future grace is the promises of God enacted. He is watching over his word to perform it. So promises plus God's fulfillment of those promises, that's future grace. And if standing on the promises you cannot fail works for you, sing it. I'm just trying to put some new vocabulary on a very old and glorious truth. 2 Corinthians 1:20 says, all the promises of God find their yes in Christ. You know what that means for you, Christian? United to Christ by faith, all of them are yours. You want a simple hermeneutical guideline for how to read the Old Testament? It's like, okay, I'm reading the Psalms, and it says something precious about the future of this righteous person. Can I read that for me? Yes, because of 2 Corinthians 1:20. All the promises of God are yes in Christ. Christ inherits all the promises, and you are in Christ, and therefore you inherit all the promises, cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation, and therefore it's your book. All of them he bought with his blood. Now, a word about past grace. What's the relationship between future grace and past grace? And this gives me an occasion to say a word about the theme verse of the conference, Romans 8:32. If you were to ask me, if you made me tell you one verse in the Bible, if I had to choose one as my favorite verse, okay? The one I write when little 9-year-old kids come up to me at a conference and say, would you sign my Bible? And I used to not do that, thinking, I didn't write this. And it feels presumptuous. And now I realize that hurts kids. That's not helpful to a 9-year-old kid. He just admires your preaching, and he thought he could, sorry, you know. So now I sign him. And I sign him down in the left-hand corner, real small. Not big, up at the top. And that's the verse I put in every time. Romans 8:32. I love this verse. So let me talk about it for about 5 minutes, and you'll see why. Because there isn't anything more important in the Christian life than to understand and own the relationship between the first half of Romans 8:32 and the second half of Romans 8:32. Nothing is more important than that. Is that okay? What's the verse say? Now, I understand it's a question. Like, how can a question make such a statement? All right, let's read it. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. That's the first half. How will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Question. Now, a rhetorical question is a question that doesn't have an answer provided because it assumes you can provide the answer, right? Paul expects you to be able to answer this resoundingly because of what he's written in Romans. So what would you answer? I mean, the question is, he who did not spare his own son but gave him up for us all, comma, how? How will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Do you think he's saying, tell me some ways that he won't give you all things? How will he not give you all things? Oh, here's 5 ways he won't give me all things. Come on. Of course not, Piper. That is not what he expects you to respond with. What does he expect you to say? How will he not with you, with Christ, give you all things? And you say, no way he won't. No how he won't. There's no how. He said how, there's no how. Right? There's no how that he won't give you all things. Because he didn't spare Christ, he will give you everything you need to do his will and glorify his name. It is fixed. That's the gist of the... So what's the relationship between the two? He didn't spare his own son. Now, don't you hear in the words didn't spare instead of just gave? He didn't spare means this was not easy for God to do. Isn't that what that means? Didn't spare, but gave. This was an enormous, I dare say, the biggest obstacle God had to overcome to save me and you. The biggest obstacle God had to overcome to save us is the dignity, beauty, preciousness, and belovedness of his son. To put him to torture and shame and nakedness and spitting and beard pulling and mockery and suffering and death. No, not going to do it. He's God. You're not doing that. Except God is out to save you. So he didn't spare his own son, overcame the biggest obstacle, so now it's a piece of cake to give you all things. Isn't that the argument? From the greater to the lesser. There's a Latin name for that. Don't worry about it. From the greater to the lesser. If you can lift 1,000 pounds, you can lift 10 pounds. That's the argument, right? If he didn't spare his own son, he won't spare any effort to give me everything I need. That's the greatest verse in the Bible. If you say, isn't Romans 8:28 better? No! This is Romans 8:28 in the second half plus foundation. Again, Romans 8:28 is thrown in the second half of the verse. You get everything you need. So, the relationship between past grace and future grace is that because of past grace at the cross, you get all the grace you need for the future. That's the argument. Future grace, God's work on your behalf, is based squarely on the pardon that happened at Calvary. Before I get really practical now and tell you how this works in helping you deal with conflict, there is one more illuminating question. You might ask, if I were you, I'd ask me, you talk about future grace, all God's practical, powerful, undeserved help for every need you have from now to eternity, and you talk about past grace, and especially at the cross, where all your debts were paid and God overcame the biggest obstacle to save you. Why don't you ever talk about present grace? which I don't, ever. Good question. Now, my answer will sound philosophical and crazy, but give me 3 minutes, and I do mean I don't care about the philosophical dimensions of this. I don't care that it sounds crazy because I live this way, all right? And it has worked gloriously to save me from many, many sins. The reason I don't talk about present grace is because I'm not sure the present exists. Or to be more careful, I can't find it. I can't put my finger on it. And the reason it sounds crazy is because we all use the word present to include durations of time with a little bit of past and a little bit of future. So we say, we live in this present era. What do you mean by that? This present era. Well, probably starting 50 years in the back and 20 years into the future. And we're in there. That's the present era. Well, that's a sum of some past and some future making an era called present. I can't put my finger on anything that is this present moment. You walk into the doctor and he says, "How you feeling?" You say, "Well, for the present, I feel good." What do you mean by that? Probably last 2 hours and the 5 minutes I've been in this room. And that's all. That's just a sum of some past, not the future, just here I am. So right now, so that word is a problem. Because there's no now, except the way there's present. So if I say, right now, what's present? Like, okay, let's do it. Let's find it. It's now. Now that is 5 seconds gone. What am I going to do with that? What can I do with that? Nothing. It is practically useless for me. As soon as I think I've put my finger on it, it's 5 seconds old. And I'm calling it past kindness of God to sustain me while I'm talking. What this means is, I don't worry ever, and I bet Karen doesn't either. I don't think we worriers ever worry about the present. Ever. I want to know what you're going to say about this sermon 1/2 hour from now. That's what I worry about. Or the 5 seconds out, whether I'm going to lose my place and not be able to find it, or I'm working from an iPad. It could turn off. What would I do? Well, I brought along the document so that if it turned off, see how anxious I am? I'm covering my bases with paper, not the Holy Spirit. I don't worry about the present. Boom, there it goes. It's gone. It's just... So you just need to know, I didn't embrace my love affair with future grace because I was indifferent to God's present reality. I embraced it because as I look at the Bible and as I look at John Piper's needs, all my trust issues are in the future. For my kids, for my marriage, for my health, for my eternal destiny. Everything that challenges me is yet to happen. And if you say, well, I got some pretty big mess in my background that has a lingering effect on me, the only thing about that disturbs you is what 5 seconds from now it's going to do, and 5 minutes from now it's going to do, and 5 years it's going to do. It's not the past per se that you're worried about. It's the effect on you for the future that you're bothered about. Because the effect it's had on you. So it all translates into the future. So I wrote my biggest book on future grace.